Right now, as you're watching this, somewhere on Earth, a temperature record is being broken. This summer, entire cities are baking under red alerts. Roads are literally buckling, and the weather maps have turned deep red and purple. And it raises a question almost nobody wants to say out loud. What if this is only the beginning? What if the heat never really stops, and every summer from here just gets worse? So let's run that forecast. Because the deadliest weather on Earth doesn't roar like a hurricane or rise like a flood. It arrives in total silence under a clear blue sky, and it already kills more people than storms, floods, and tornadoes combined. This is the heat wave. First, how it actually kills. Your body cools itself by sweating, but when the air is scorching, sweat stops working and your core temperature begins to climb. Past a certain point, your organs start to fail. It's called heat stroke, and it can kill a healthy person in hours. But heat rarely hits the strong hardest. It hits the elderly, the sick, and the poor, people trapped in hot rooms with no air conditioning, often alone, where no one thinks to check on them until it's too late. And in a big city, the concrete soaks up the sun all day and keeps radiating that heat long after dark, so the streets stay dangerously hot all night. Where does it come from? Look at the map. See this dome of high pressure parked over the region? That's the culprit. It acts like a giant lid, trapping the hot air and shoving the clouds away so the sun can scorch the ground for days. Scientists call it a heat dome. And as the planet warms, these domes are getting more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting. But to understand where we're going, you have to see where we've been, because we have lived this exact nightmare before. Again and again and again. Go back to Chicago, 1995. In 5 days, the heat killed more than 700 people. And the real horror was how it happened. The city didn't take it seriously at first because heat doesn't look like an emergency. By the time officials reacted, the morgue was so overwhelmed that bodies were stored in refrigerated meat trucks parked outside. And when investigators studied who died, they found something chilling. It wasn't only the heat, it was loneliness. The victims were overwhelmingly elderly people living alone, too afraid to open their windows, with no one to check on them until it was too late. And in a big city, the concrete soaks up the sun all day and keeps radiating that heat long after dark, so the streets stay dangerously hot all night. 8 years later, in 2003, the same story unfolded across Europe. But bigger. More than 70,000 people died. And Europe was caught completely off guard because it struck in August, when much of the continent was away on holiday. In France, families were on vacation while their elderly relatives died alone in stifling apartments. Hospitals were swamped, ambulances couldn't keep up, and the morgues overflowed. Refrigerated warehouses became temporary mortuaries. Help came, but it came late. Afterward, France built a national heat emergency plan, warning levels, cooling centers, and registries of vulnerable people, vowing never to be caught sleeping again. Then came 2010, and Russia. A heat dome parked over the country and refused to move. The land dried out, wildfires exploded, and thick, toxic wildfire smog filled Moscow, so dense you couldn't see across the street, doubling the death rate as people choked in their own city. The final toll was around 56,000, still the deadliest heat wave ever recorded. The government even banned grain exports as the crops burned in the fields, a decision that spiked food prices around the entire world. One heat dome over one country, and food prices climbed for families all around the world. And then, 2021. This time, the warnings worked. Forecasters saw the dome coming and said it would be historic. It was worse. A small Canadian town called Lytton smashed the country's all-time temperature record, hitting nearly 50 degrees Celsius. And the very next day, a wildfire tore through Lytton and destroyed almost the entire town in minutes. Hundreds died across the region. Again, mostly the elderly, alone, in homes never built for heat like this. Even with the warnings, it still wasn't enough. Do you see the pattern? Every single time, the heat is underestimated, the response comes too slow, and the people who die are almost always the old, the sick, and the alone. So that brings us to right now. Are we finally ready? Yes and no. We are far better prepared than we were in 1995. Many cities now have heat action plans, early warning systems, and cooling centers. Forecasters can see a dome coming days in advance. Some cities have even started giving heat waves names and rankings like hurricanes, just to make people take them seriously. That's real progress, and it saves lives. But here's the problem. The tools have improved. Our habits haven't. Most people still don't treat heat as deadly. They don't know the warning signs of heat stroke. They don't think to check on the neighbor who lives alone. And there's a darker risk hiding underneath it all, our power grids. Because when everyone cranks their air conditioning at once, the demand can overload the system, and a blackout in the middle of a record heat wave is one of the most dangerous situations a modern city can face. We have better plans than ever. We're just not sure everyone will follow them in time. So what happens next? The honest forecast is this. The domes are going to keep coming, and they're going to keep getting hotter. Nights, which are supposed to give your body a chance to recover, are cooling less and less. And in a few places on Earth, we are starting to brush up against a limit scientists have warned about for years. A combination of heat and humidity so extreme that a healthy human can't survive it for more than a few hours, even in the shade, even with all the water in the world. Can we cope? Here's the strange, almost hopeful truth. We can, because this is the most preventable disaster on the planet. Unlike an earthquake or a hurricane, you can't stop a heat wave, but you can almost always survive one. The knowledge exists. The tools exist. The only thing standing between us and thousands of saved lives is whether we finally start treating the silent killer as seriously as we treat the loud ones. So here is your survival forecast, because you are not helpless. When the warning goes up, drink water before you feel thirsty. Stay out of the sun in the deadly hours around midday. Find the coolest room, the shade, or a public cooling center. Never, ever leave a child or a pet in a parked car where the heat turns lethal in minutes. And the single most important thing, the one that saves the most lives of all, check on the people around you, the elderly neighbor, the relative who lives alone, because in almost every heat wave in history, the ones who died weren't caught in some dramatic event. They were simply alone and unready in a room that got too hot. The dome is building. The map is turning red. We already know exactly how this story goes. We've watched it play out for decades. The only thing left to decide is whether, this time, we finally change the ending. And that limit humans can't survive? A few places on Earth have just started to touch it. But that's a whole other story.